Hey, Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom. All praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us His truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquath and listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Requai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will as always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I was kind of inspired by a conversation I was having with one of my elders. And it went along the lines of how our people's morality, essentially, it deteriorates, being in Babylon. And we're just speaking and having a compare and contrast of how things are essentially in other parts of the world, i.e., for example, we're using the example of the Caribbean. And essentially, what happens is in the Caribbean, although a lot of our people may not know that they are, Israelites, but there's a lot of things that they still practice within their spirit. There's a lot of things that they might keep, and even if you go further back to the Israelite diaspora in parts of Western Africa, right? There's a lot of things that our people still kept. There's a lot of customs that they kept. And the further and further we got from Jerusalem and then being in Babylon, aka Babylon the Great, there's a lot of things that the degeneracy the has essentially gotten to an all-time high with our people. And in Babylon, it's becoming the worst of the worst, because being surrounded by all these different nations and these different heathens, there is no essential structure, but there is essentially a withering away of their morality, a withering away of their stature, because we've really and truly have discontinued from our heritage and forgotten the ways of the Lord. So that's pretty much the premise, and I sincerely pray and hope that this lesson is edifying, right? So okay, so this is Proverbs chapter 12 verse 26, and it says, the righteous is more excellent than his neighbor, but the way of the wicked seduced them, right? So being surrounded by all these different heathens, what has happened to our people is that we've become seduced into these different ways, these different customs, these different cultures that are really no culture, because the culture has essentially brought us to a level of degeneracy. These gods require certain, practices with this, which have essentially have made our the Lord, essentially it's become a displeasing eyes in His sight. So this is why, when you really think about it, why we have to be, we have to be separate. Because what happens to Jake when they're surrounded by all these different nations is the fact that, they get seduced into these different customs and these different ways. Just bear with me on this. And eventually, they have children, and their children forget the ways of the Lord, right? And they forget, and they get accustomed to the ways of what's going on currently in that land, right? That's why Paul says to the Israelites in Corinth, he said, I've espoused you to one husband that you may be chaste. And when you go into the etymology of that word chaste, it means to have a pure mind. We're not supposed to be having all these other, and that's one of our commandments. We're not supposed to have all these different other gods, before the Lord, Yahweh Bashim Shai, right? The Lord is essentially a jealous power. I'm jealous over you with godly jealousy, right? And our people's, being in the midst of Babylon, it's corrupted the minds of our people to the point where they don't have a sense of morality anymore. They've taken on the vibration of Esau, because Esau is really the one who's really ruling and operating this kingdom, right? They don't have that compassion, that they might have. They don't share, they've become a lot distrustful. They've become very hateful towards one another. They don't have that love mentality, like when Yahweh Shai said, these two laws, to roughly paraphrase, hang the law and the prophets, to love the Lord with all thy heart and soul, and to love thy neighbor as thyself, right? Those two simple things, our people don't have those things as much as they used to. That camaraderie, that rich affection for one another, they don't have that here in Babylon. They don't have the mindset to care for, and have respect for the elderly. That's another thing I've noticed also. They don't have that reverence for the hoary head, as the scriptures talk about. They don't have that reverence for, teachers, elders. That's lost. That's gone. Those, different things that's supposed to make us separate and supposed to make us above these other nations. These other nations, they're looking at Jake, and we're essentially become a laughing stock in the eyes, in their eyes, right? They're not looking at, they don't look at us as a royal people, So, this is Judges chapter 2, verse 10, and it says, actually, I'll start at verse 8, and it says, and Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old, and they buried him in the border of his inheritance, and Timnath-heres, in the mount of Ephraim, the north side of the hill Gash. and also all that generation were gathered to unto their fathers, and arose another generation after them, which knew not the Lord, nor yet the works which he hath done for Israel. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and served Baalim. And they forsook the Lord Yahweh Bashem Shai of their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods, and the gods of the people round about them, and bowed themselves unto them, and provoked the Lord to anger. Right. So I'm reading this to show that there's a parallel between, what happens when you have these different vibrations surrounding Jake, because they didn't essentially get rid of all these different heathens, but rather these practices of these other heathens became a snare unto you. Just like today, the practices and the behaviors and the customs of the heathens that's surrounded in Babylon the Great, because Babylon the Great is known as the mother of all harlots, because essentially what she is, America, she encapsulates all the other kingdoms, all those different gods that came before America, right? So you have Nineveh, you have Babylon, you have Persians and the Medes, you have Greece, you have Rome, all these different gods that came before her, all that is refurbished, repackaged with a nice little bow on it, and revamped, and it's made into a more friendly version with a so-called, and a lot of these things have a so-called Christian, veneer over it. But Jake doesn't think that these gods think that they're still worshiping the Lord. But all these different, when you strip away at it, they realize they're still serving these different gods, right? Like, for example, I read the Ashtaroth. Ashtaroth goes into the fertility worship, sex magic and all that, Easters and bunnies and so on and so forth, right? So the point is, they are not supposed to be entangled with the affairs of these other gods. But being in that environment, our Jake has lost their morality, since these other gods have become a snare unto them, right? So let me go to the book of Proverbs. This is Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6, and it says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it," right? So ideally, our children are supposed to be raised having that understanding of who they are, and understanding there's law, statutes, and commandments, right? This is our foundation of knowing things to do and knowing what not to do, right? But when you look at the landscape of Babylon, you have a lot of, our people, they move here, and the little morality that they did have, right? It withers away when they get amalgamated with these different heathens, so they essentially are being trained up in a way that is into degeneracy, rather than the opposite of degeneracy, rather than an upright vine, a noble vine, as in Jeremiah says. As a matter of fact, let me get that. Where is that? 1 second. Because we're supposed to be a noble vine, right? But our people are being trained up in a way that is promoting fruits of degeneracy, malice, envy, hatred, and especially amongst their own people. So they become a terror. They become a bane unto their own people. They don't have the mindset of actually maintaining that love. And what's that love is the keeping of the commandments, right? To essentially, have that reverence for Yahweh Bashim Shai, and seeing Yahweh Shai in their own people. But our people don't see that. They see an enemy. They see the ops. They see somebody they need to unalive, right? To give them street cred. That is the conduct of our people, degenerate vines, as it says here. This is Jeremiah 2, verse 21, and it says, "Yet I have planted thee a noble vine, a holy and right seed. How art thou turned into a degenerate plant of a strange vine unto me? For though I wash thee with nitre and take thee much soap, thine iniquity is marked before me." And you see that in the way their conduct, in their fruits. And Yahushua talked about that also. It says a tree is known by its fruits. And when you go into that word fruit, it in the Greek there, it says karpos, and karpos refers to it refers to a work, it refers to a deed, behaviors. As a matter of fact, let me get that. What does deed mean? Just for edification. Oh, 1 second. Etymology. The deeds are essentially displeasing. It says, this is deed in the etymology. It says that which is done, acted, or performed, whether good or bad, great or small, a doing, act, action, event. It says thing done It says thing laid down, law. And that's what people are missing is essentially oh, hold on. Check this out. It says a load, burden, in Greek thesis, meaning a placing or a setting. It says to set, place, right? So, we have a load, we have a burden, but our people, they don't want to come under that burden, right? They don't want to come under that charge, of what it takes to be a royal vine, a noble vine, right? Because that takes discipline. What's that? That's in as a matter of fact, let me go to this is Deuteronomy 6 and 6. And it says, and these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and thou shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way. And when you think about it, the conversation or the manner of life, the way our people conduct themselves, that's one of our people's biggest problems, right? So now they're becoming essentially a reproach in the eyes of whether it's other businesses, their own people. They don't have conduct when they're dealing with when they're in the midst of these other nations. So essentially what happens, they become a laughing stock. There's no sense of, there's no conduct, there is no morals, there's no scruples with our people. They behave the way they want, and then they wonder why these things happen to them, right? Because really and truly you have forsaken the Lord thy power, right? And it leads to a sentiment of degeneracy. You're fallen from your royal stature. It says, verse 7, thou shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. And the kind of things our people and our children, they talk about, it's not their heritage of their forefathers. Though that kind of conversation is not, that doesn't exist amongst our people. It's the folly, these different celebrities that they look up to. This is the kind of people they idolize, and they idolize their behavior, right? And a lot of their behavior is of complete degeneracy, right? So this is one of my let me go to the Apocrypha here 1 second. This is I just wanted to give a quick example of proper, morality, especially in the midst of captivity, right? This is Tobit chapter 4. Let's start at verse 1 and read down. And it says, in the days of Tobit, in that day Tobit remembered the money which he had committed it to Gabil in regions of Media. And he said to himself, I have wished, for death. Wherefore I do not call for my son Tobias, that I may signify to him of the money before I die. And when he had called him, he said, my son, when I am dead, bury me, and despise not thy mother, and honor her of all the days of thy life. And that's another problem within our people as well. And that's another commandment as well, honoring your parents, honoring your father and your mother, you know. And it's funny, man. Like, I've noticed, you know, um, being in the midst of Babylon, that there could be Jakes, there could be Edomites, but a lot of children here, they call their parents by their first name, and that is a big no-no. That's crazy, man. There's a lack of respect for elderly. There's a lack of respect for parents. There's a lack of respect for teachers, elders. Man, that's why the scriptures say if there wasn't a remnant, we shall be unto like Sodom and Gomorrah, to roughly paraphrase, because this generation they don't have any kind of scruples left, man. They're just agents of chaos. That's really all they are. They're just agents of chaos waiting for that modern day Assyrian to press the button and wreak a bunch of havoc on them, man. I'm talking about Trump, right? To essentially, take these guys out, because they're just degenerate plants, man, and you just have to burn them. That's really what it is, right? So going back to the point here, verse 3, and it says, "But honor her all the days of thy life, and do that which shall please her, and grieve her not. Remember thy son, that she saw many dangers for thee, and when thou wast in her womb, and when she is dead, bury her by me in one grave. My son," here's the point, "my son, be mindful of the Lord Yahweh, Bashem Shai, our power all the days, and let not thy will be set to sin or transgress thy commandments." So essentially, he's giving his son spiritual game on how to please the Lord, right? How to actually, be an upright man as he steps into that role of manhood, right? It's another thing also, our people get advised on how to be men be what they say toxic masculinity. So I'm saying that in a sense of, they see those examples in your entertainers, right? In your rappers, and they essentially think that their counsel is right. And the scriptures say that there's a way that seemeth right unto a man, but essentially it leads to destruction, to roughly paraphrase, right? So, their ways are not upright, right? These people's ways are not upright, So, it says, verse 5, and it says, "Do uprightly all thy life long, and follow not the ways of unrighteousness. For thou deal truly, thy doing shall prosperously succeed to thee. To all them that live justly, give alms of thy substance. And when thou givest alms, let not thy eye be envious, neither turn thy face away from any poor. And the face of the Most High, Yahweh, Bashem Shai, shall not be turned away from thee," right? So giving even more understanding on things that actually please the Lord. Because when you think about it in this society, for example, I'm just going to use alms as an example. Like, with alms, man, our people have essentially Esau's mentality. When I say that, is that greed, that spirit of trying to hold on, that niggard spirit, that spirit of just holding on to a lot of the resources, because this is his kingdom and this is the vibration of the heathen that you're living under. So of course, us being the Lord's woman, Jake is going to take on the vibration of Esau in that same manner and sentiment. And they've forgotten the spiritual aspect of actually giving, because the scriptures do say something as simple as charity covereth a multitude of sins. So they don't have those good deeds, they don't have those good works, they don't have those good behaviors that make them what's the word I'm looking for, that make them upright, that make them honorable, that make them wholesome, that make them sane. Right? Continuing on, verse 7, it says, "Give alms of thy substance, and when thou givest alms, let not thy eye be envious, and neither shall neither turn thy face away from any poor, and the face of the Most High shall not be turned away from thee. Right? So essentially, it's about, character in the midst of captivity, and our people don't have that. Right? That's why these precepts, are so important in the midst of this valley of shadow of death. Right? But I kind of just wanted to touch on this, because there's a lot of conduct that our people are missing in the midst of captivity. And when you have a generation, like a first generation, they come with the little morality that they have, actually practicing the scriptures without actually knowing the scriptures. For example, like when the scriptures say the Gentiles knew not the law, you know, they do things that are contained in the law, right? So those little things, those, whether it could be hospitality or dietary laws and so on and so forth, there are certain things that they kept without knowing who they were, and then when they come here, all that withers away, being surrounded by these damn heathens, man. So anyways, that's pretty much the point. But Lord's will, this lesson was quick and edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim El Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.